morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today at the New Mexico Department of Justice. As many of you have reported in the past, we have had significant issues with student safety, in particular with instances of hazing and cyberbullying at both higher education institutions in our state and in K through 12 schools. They have occurred, unfortunately, in various communities and have impacted a variety of students who, quite frankly, have a basic expectation that they are safe. And I know, as I can speak as a parent, that any time we send our kids to school, whether it's kindergarten or their first day as a freshman at one of our universities, there is a basic expectation that we are handing over the care and custody, at least for the day, of the most important and precious things in our lives, and that's our kids. And I think we rightly have an expectation that the coaches, the administrators, and the teachers who are responsible for taking care of them meet those expectations and do right and do everything in their power to care for our children the way they would expect to care for their own. Because of that, and in light of the recent report that we issued with respect to the specific and egregious allegations of hazing that occurred inside the New Mexico State men's basketball team, we promised to work with legislative leaders, stakeholders, and others to develop a comprehensive approach to addressing those issues. And today we are pleased and proud to be joined not only by Senator Mo Maestas, who will be the legislative sponsor for these initiatives, but also District Attorney Marcus Montoya and the head of the New Mexico Parent Teachers Association, Renata Whitty, to give perspective on these proposals. In general terms, and Senator Maestas will walk through some of the more specific provisions, including in the legislation, we are including both reporting requirements and training requirements for higher education institutions to deal with this, the issue of hazing specifically at an institutional level. But we are also including civil causes of action that affected and impacted students can take advantage of for any institution that may have neglected to fulfill its legal duty, as well as criminal penalties and enhanced criminal penalties for any perpetrators who have engaged in cyberbullying or hazing, and the penalties associated with those criminal violations increase in connection with the harm that results from that conduct. We think it's a balanced approach. We think it's a necessary element of any comprehensive package, but I do want to stress the fact that it's far past time for New Mexico to move on these issues. Again, we are one of only 6 states in the nation that does not deal with these issues, and I think the public, in not only its renewed focus on public safety, but on its renewed focus on how educators and administrators are caring for our kids, I think every citizen in this state has an expectation that we move on that, and I'm proud and pleased to be joined by these leaders to start having an important conversation that I hope results in real action in the upcoming 60-day session. And with that, allow me to introduce Renata Whitty of the New Mexico Parent Teacher Association.
Thank you. Good morning. And thank you for inviting New Mexico PTA to this press conference. My name is Renata Whitty, and I currently serve as the Vice President for Legislation and Advocacy for New Mexico PTA. And as a representative of PTA members from across the state, the safety and well-being of our children is top of mind every day. When we send our children off to school, when they participate in extracurricular activities, and when they spend time with their peers. National PTA standards for family school partnerships highlights the importance of collaboration between schools, education leaders, families, and community members. And this collaboration allows us to create a supportive educational ecosystem. And that is why New Mexico PTA is very proud to be here today to stand with Senator Maestas and the New Mexico Attorney General regarding legislation around cyberbullying and hazing. Cyberbullying is a harmful practice that affects a student's self-esteem. It impacts their ability to learn. It impacts the relationship with other students and their peers, and it impacts their personal, mental, and physical health. Every child deserves to feel safe in the extracurricular activities and in the organizations that they participate in. Hazing is a dangerous practice, and it can have devastating consequences. It should not be considered a rite of passage. Hazing sends the wrong message to our youth about the values of respect, belonging, and leadership. You know, our children should feel secure and that they are growing up in a world where the adults around them, schools, education leaders, families, and community members, make a commitment to protect them. We need to send a clear message to the youth of New Mexico. New Mexico prioritizes your safety and your well-being. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. Marcus Montoya, your 8th Judicial District Attorney. And as District Attorney, I have seen in my community how cyberbullying and hazing have terrible, lasting physical, emotional, psychological, and sometimes fatal consequences. And so, as a prosecutor, we do not currently have any tools in our toolkit to address these particular issues and behavior and misconduct. And so I do stand here proudly with Senator Maestas, the Department of Justice, and other stakeholders to support this very critical legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonio Maestas, State Senator from District 26 here in Albuquerque. Good morning, and thank you for being here. Protecting our children, our future, is my highest priority as a state senator. It's our duty as leaders, parents, and community members to ensure that every child in New Mexico grows up in an environment where they feel safe and supported. And that's why this year, during our upcoming 60-day session, I'm proud to be the prime sponsor of these two critical pieces of legislation that address pressing issues impacting our youth, cyberbullying and hazing. First, let's talk about cyberbullying. In today's digital age, this has become almost an epidemic. It's no longer confined to playgrounds and classrooms like old school bullying. It follows our children home, invading the very spaces where they should feel safe and secure during evening hours or whatnot. According to recent studies, over 20% of students nationwide have reported being victimized by cyberbullying. This is not just about cruel messages and harmful posts. The consequences can be devastating to our young people. Increased anxiety, depression, and tragically even suicidal ideation. The Cyberbullying Prevention Bill is designed to give families, schools, and law enforcement, particularly prosecutors, the tools they need to combat this pervasive issue. It's time to take a stand and protect our children in the digital space, just as we do in the real world. I urge my colleagues in the legislature and communities across the state to join us in addressing this urgent issue during the upcoming session. With regards to hazing, this outdated and dangerous practice has no place in New Mexico schools or organizations. Across the nation, we've seen heartbreaking tragedies, even lives lost and futures shattered, all due to senseless acts of humiliation and harm disguised as tradition. This is unacceptable. The anti-hazing bill I'll be introducing will ensure that our schools and communities are places of safety and respect, not fear and humiliation. It sends a clear and unequivocal message that hazing will not be tolerated in the state of New Mexico. Every student deserves to feel valued, supported, and not degraded or endangered. So together, these bills represent a commitment to the well-being of New Mexico's children, both online and in the real world. So I'm proud to work alongside Attorney General Torrez and the New Mexico Department of Justice to create a safer future for our kids. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues in the legislature to ensure these protections become law and signed by the Honorable Governor and give every child and every student the opportunity to thrive here in New Mexico. Thank you.
And with that, we'd be happy to stand for any questions you may have. Faith.
Hi.
Hi.
With KOAT. So there's been a lot of concerns, and thank you for this, by the way. Just my question as a whole. What defines hazing? Because in our Target 7 hazing investigation, we first raised concerns of hazing in schools across our state, including at New Mexico State University, but that was sexual assault. In Santa Fe High, we just covered that as well. That was alleged sexual assault. But at UNM, a basketball player was allegedly physically abused over plain seats. So those lines are often blurred, just to clear up any confusion. Like, what would define hazing in the legislature?
Well, to spare you a pretty lengthy recitation of the bill, because it actually, the definition goes on for nearly a page to cover a range of activity from, I think, what most people sort of, if they have a more antiquated view of what this looked like, something that involves physical harm, duress, stress, all the way up to including whipping, beating, striking, coercing others to engage in activities that involve sleep deprivation, exposure to the elements, confinement in a small space. This is a comprehensive list, and one that is flexible in terms of its definition to cover all forms of inappropriate physical and psychological pressure or force that could be placed on a student under these conditions in connection with some organization at their school or university.
And then just to add on, so for example, with NMSU, that was obviously, well, allegedly, sexual assault, depending on the level of what's considered hazing, whether it's physical abuse or sexual assault, those charges will obviously vary from criminal, civil, whatever the case may be.
It will, and one important feature of this, which I think is an important aspect of the question that you asked, what this does is it provides new criminal penalties and new criminal offenses that are carefully defined, but it does not do so in a way that excludes or inhibits a prosecutor's ability to charge the same activity in the alternative or in a different way, right? So we prosecutors, District Attorney Montoya and others, will still have the ability, based on the particular facts presented in the investigation that they're evaluating, on whether or not they choose to charge it strictly only as hazing or as some other crime that is already included in our criminal code or in the alternative. And we think that's important because we want to give investigators and prosecutors the flexibility they need and not try and confine their charging decisions in a way that don't neatly map onto the definitions that we've set forward.
Thank you.
Justin Garcia, Las Cruces Bulletin. In the draft of the bill, there is a clause about that consent is not a defense to the charge. Can you kind of explain why that was important to put in?
Well, I think that really goes to the unusual dynamics that are at play in these kinds of situations, right? Hazing in the context or the use of force or pressure in these situations usually involves a social component of people who are engaged either in a team activity or some other organization or club or group that is under the sort of framework of some educational institution. And because of that, there's a lot of psychological pressure on kids in particular to try and fit in and try to belong. And what that means is, in a situation in the world outside of those educational institutions or in a different context, where you're dealing with two strangers that have no connection and have no underlying social bond that they're trying to maintain, it's easy enough to say, this person hit me, assaulted me, engaged in this activity, and you wouldn't consent to that in any normal situation. But there are situations where a member of a team, because they're trying to be a part of a team, would appear to go along with something because they feel pressured to do that. And that's what makes this unique, right? That's why it, in fact, calls for a different framework for analyzing the conduct and enforcing the penalties and allowing prosecutors to map onto the specific facts the most appropriate charge. But any victim of hazing, they may be in a situation and I won't speak to any one particular case, but it is not uncommon for the level of resistance that a potential victim may have to be lessened in the context of hazing because of the social and psychological pressures involved in trying to belong with the group.
Stefan?
I'm curious about cyberbullying, sort of how you, and this might be determined once these cases start being opened, but how you determine like causality, first of all, like how you show that cyberbullying caused great physical or psychological harm, but then also like, you know, the internet is a very anonymized place, sometimes cyberbullying happens across state lines. Could you talk a little bit about like the enforcement mechanism?
Well, I think one of the things that you need to look at is the text of the language itself. Again, it's a pretty lengthy framework, but it is engaging in that activity with reckless disregard that the communication may have the effect. And then it lists all the potential effects, right? Reasonable fear of physical harm, causing substantially detrimental effect on their physical and mental health. In other words, it creates a mental state that is an essential component of criminal cases that we have to prosecute, but one that is centered around reckless disregard. In other words, we are not going to have to prove necessarily that in engaging in cyberbullying, I actually intend for you, for example, or an individual to engage in this practice, I intend for the victim to harm themselves in some way. It's enough under this framework to have reckless disregard for the foreseeable risk that what you are doing could lead to that outcome. And that's how we deal with those issues. Because a lot of times, and you're correct to point out, you know, when in the most extreme example that I know Senator Maestas is concerned about, where pervasive bullying goes on, where it's not just one person, it's several kids at once, it's happening 24/7 around the clock, we end up in situations where, sadly, a young person kills themselves. And that's happened here, it's happened in other parts of the country. And inevitably, when investigators start tracking this down and they go talk to people, one of the first things they say is, well, I didn't actually intend for him to do that, right? That's not what I wanted. This makes it very clear that reckless disregard to that foreseeable outcome is enough for a criminal sanction. And I think that is in alignment with not just the law and other legal statutes and criminal statutes that we have, but more importantly with the values we have as a community, right? If you're going to engage in that kind of behavior that could lead to that kind of outcome, you have a baseline expectation of understanding those consequences and being held accountable for violating those expectations.
Griffin Rushton with KOB4. I have one quick clerical question. Senator Maestas, are you going to be carrying both of these bills during the session?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I will. I'll be the prime sponsor, essentially. We'll run them through the Senate side. As you all know, Senate bills don't have numbers yet. So even if we introduced it today or tomorrow, it wouldn't have a number. So the leader will assign numbers to them probably Wednesday, Thursday morning. So then you guys will know the numbers. But yeah, I'll be the prime sponsor on both these bills.
And then my second question was, if any of you could provide, we have the NMSU example for hazing. I'm curious if you could provide an example or tell us about a case or incident regarding cyberbullying that really prompted the need for this kind of legislation in New Mexico.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think Faith touched on it, right? In the media, you all have done a good job of covering incidents around the state of New Mexico, not just at post-secondary, but also at high schools. And so those are the examples of what prompted this type of legislation and the necessity for it, because, again, there is no tool in the toolkit right now to try to hold those accountable, but there's also, the bill allows for training and education component of this, which is also very important for the purposes of accomplishing our goal.
I guess I'm asking if you could provide any details about a case where cyberbullying was involved and you couldn't do anything about it. I'm just curious to know what that case kind of looked like or what that incident looked like.
Okay, and so I don't have any cases, but perhaps the senator might be in touch with that.
No, thank you for that. I didn't think about this in the reading the drafts of the bill, but I have a childhood friend whose son committed suicide about 10, 12 years ago down at Los Lunas, and some of it was attributable to the bullying he was receiving, a lot of it online. So I'm sure there's a lot of examples in our homes and in our communities that we may not be privy to, but that was, but yeah, that's the one that just came to mind just now.
And I think Senator Maestas makes an important point. It's hard for us to point to a particular pending case because we don't currently have, in many instances, the tools we need for bringing the kind of criminal accountability that we expect in these contexts. I think if you, and I can speak from my own experience, both in talking to students, but also talking to parents, the pervasiveness of social media and phones in the lives of young people today is something that, for those of us that grew up in a different generation, it's hard for us to understand. But it is on all the time, right? And I think that was sort of really an important point that was laid out by Senator Maestas in the beginning. When we were growing up, there was certainly bullying, but when the school bell rang at the end of the day, we got to go home, and usually that was the end of it. This is something that happens all the time, and it also happens in a way that facilitates not just one person, but because of the nature of social media, and everyone here is aware of the fact that we brought several actions against social media companies and my concerns about technology in general, it leads to this group think and group behavior, and it enables and incentivizes young people to engage in behavior that, frankly, if they were going to do it in 1984 in front of everybody, probably wouldn't do it, right? There's just the same dynamics weren't necessarily there. Now, it's easy enough for people to send out a text, post something on an app, post something on a platform, and really start a snowball effect that amplifies the pressure on people. And I have yet to go to a school, talk to a parent group, or talk to a group of young people, and when we ask the question about whether or not they feel they've been not only sexually harassed online, but pressured or bullied online, it's pervasive. And that has to stop. We have to have more accountability, obviously, by parents and educators, but we have to send a clear message in our criminal code that the behavior will not be tolerated and it will be prosecuted when it happens.
Hey, I'm Jeff from KOAT. I have a question about the bipartisanship, and this should not be partisan at all, but I'm just curious if you have bipartisan support. And I know we're one of 6 states that don't even have a law in the book, so I'm wondering if do you think you can cross the finish line during this session?
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, bipartisanship is very important. So I'll be in the same room with all my colleagues for 60 straight days. So we'll be rounding up co-sponsors on the minority side, and also bicameralism. Sometimes it's tougher than bipartisanship. So we'll be rounding up folks in the House to be co-sponsors as well. And just a quick note, if I may, Mr. Attorney General, 95% of folks follow the law because it's the law. And so this will just send a message to every teenager, every mom, every community that this is not acceptable behavior. And then those folks that continue with the behavior can face consequences, very severe consequences. So it's definitely something that needs to be on the books. Currently now, prosecutors can get creative and charge battery or sexual assault on the hazing stuff, but this really goes to the specifics of that crime and the peculiarities of that situation that in which the punishment fits the crime.
Time for a couple more questions. Pat and then Justin. You came down from Las Cruces, so I'll give you the last one.
Patrick with Source New Mexico. Is there an analogous law that would make bullying that leads to a suicide on the playground or in real life a crime, or is it something so pernicious outside of bullying that it needs its own law because it is done this?
Yeah, we have not crafted a particular analog to this bill for the kind of behavior that might occur in the real world, in the physical world, and again, I think that is a reflection of the rapid evolution in technology and the adoption of and use of technology, right? We are seeing a lot of behavior that used to occur strictly in the physical world be amplified by technology and because of the way in which it leads to that group dynamic. I think it presents a pretty substantial, frankly, new harm. The reason I personally have reached that conclusion is that if you look at the data around the psychological impact on young girls in particular, it is, from my perspective, undeniable. There has been a sharp increase. If you look at the work of Jonathan Haidt, the Anxious Generation, and others, there has been an explosion in self-harm, suicidal ideation, and a lot of that comes from the signals being sent from the social media landscape, but it's also signals that are reinforced by other peers, by other, people that, in the absence of that technology, probably would not engage in that behavior and certainly would not engage in it to the same degree and to the same extent. But it isn't just, the impact that we see on girls. We also see the same thing happening with young men. I mean, the rate of suicide amongst young men is on the rise, and it is also coincidence with the emergence of this technology. So this is an attempt to, I think, recognize not a behavior that is entirely new. I mean, we're not going to say that the kind of bullying or things that we've seen go on didn't occur before the technology, but what you have seen is that the technology itself amplifies its reach and amplifies the potential harm.
Justin, go ahead.
This has been kind of touched on in a couple of questions, but I wanted to ask you directly. Can you just explain why current laws like criminal sexual contact and criminal sexual penetration and battery, why those aren't enough to address hazing? And I also wanted, if you could just address, assuming this passes and goes into law, there's an outcome here of sort of saddling young people with criminal charges in their 17, 18, 19 range and the negative outcomes that can lead to.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just kind of address those two things.
Well, I'll start with the question about the charging and whether or not, why can't this conduct already be captured by the behavior that we have? We have a good deal of difficulty as prosecutors, given the facts and circumstances of some of the events that we have seen and the offenses that we have investigated that don't map onto, they just simply don't map onto the existing sexual assault charges in a way that is, I think, that takes full account of all that went into it. Because again, in the usual situation where a sexual assault occurred, none of the other exigent social circumstances and dynamics are coming into play, right? Things that are contrary to what you would expect from somebody who is being assaulted, but that's because of the nature of the social nature of the harm itself. With respect to your question about saddling young people with, criminal charges that may impact them later on in life, I am cognizant and I don't take lightly what would happen to a young person should they become charged, a subject of a criminal investigation and be taken into custody, charged, and prosecuted for it. But my role, fundamentally, is about elevating a sense of accountability in society and making sure that our criminal laws reflect the values of our community. And I think, to be perfectly honest with you, our system has tilted too far away from accountability, especially with young people, especially with juveniles. And that's a much longer conversation that I hope we have in the Senate Judiciary. But I think most people in the city of Albuquerque can see for themselves what happens when a system becomes so concerned about the impact of enhanced criminal penalties on a small group of kids will have to the detriment of the safety of everyone else. And I think they've been pretty resolute and clear about what they think. And I think that leads us to a larger question when it comes to these types of issues. It's time for our representative bodies to be mindful first and foremost about who they're representing and what values they place at the top of the list. I think Senator Maestas is exactly right, and I applaud him for sponsoring these bills, because if you showed this, including the proposed criminal penalties to the citizens of this community and the citizens of this state, without seeing one bit of polling, I'll bet you right now that they're in alignment and support with this. And for the usual voices who will complain about criminalizing this kind of activity, they are in a distinct minority. And it's far past time for representative bodies to represent the interests of the people, because if we're going to continue to be making arguments about the primacy of democracy, then democracy needs to start reflecting the will of the people that vote to put people in office. And this, like most other proposed solutions that have come out of this office and my time as district attorney, has usually enjoyed the overwhelming support of voters. It just doesn't seem to get any traction up in Santa Fe. I hope that this year is different, and I trust with the leadership of people like Senator Maestas that will be true. Thank you very much for being here, and I certainly appreciate your time and attention.